Okay, so in this video I'm going to cover half kneeling chops and half kneeling strikes. We're going to go through some of the fundamental movement principles that we're trying to expose within these drills, and it's worth keeping in mind throughout this whole video and throughout every video that we've got here that this spiral lines hierarchy is about trying to expose the principles of rotational power, not just trying to copy the movement. So this half kneeling progression covers some of the most fundamental principles that are necessary to maximise the efficiency of rotational power. It's really less about just trying to copy striking movements or chopping movements, and actually draw out some of the things that can completely derail rotational power in a host of powerful movements. Okay, so if we start off with a half kneeling lift, so I'm going to just show you through these patterns first off, and then I'll go through some of the principles that we're trying to expose here. So a half kneeling lift will look like this, from low to high. So I've just changed the attachment from high to low. That's going to go slightly higher, down and across. Okay, so the first principle of rotational power development that we're going to cover within this half kneeling context is the reciprocal pattern of the shoulders. So the shoulders are essentially, I've got this arm coming from an internally rotated position to an externally rotated position, and I've got this shoulder doing exactly the opposite. So it's coming from an externally rotated position to an internally rotated position. So that's going to look something like this: down and then across, down and then across. If I switch up in a striking motion, we're going to see the opposite. So from an internally rotated position to an externally rotated position. Coming across and up. A bit too heavy that for me. And what we see is like I say, the shoulders work in this reciprocal pattern, which was a term coined by Gray Cook within his fundamental movement screening literature. And what that does is, when you're swinging an implement, be it a cricket bat, a golf club, anything like that, is you're bringing the implement slightly closer in towards your centre of mass to reduce the inertial resistance around your body before accelerating towards the target. So if we think of, if you're striking an implement, you might be there, lead with the elbows, accelerate away. That's more of a chopping motion. We see the palm up, a supinated grip with the dominant hand there, elbow in, drive away. An example of a lifting pattern might be a tennis forehand. I'm not left-handed, but we'll see how this goes. So driving in before driving away, you see the knuckles up in a pronated position at contact point. So two slightly different variations on the same principles. Okay, so the next principle we're going to look at is this ability to dissociate the upper from the lower body. So what that means is, can we stabilise effectively with the lower body to allow a platform to rotate within the upper body? So a lot of this is down to your freedom in thoracic rotation. So if we think about this drill, I've got my legs facing straight in front of you, and I'm trying to create as much rotation as I can around in thoracic rotation from my shoulders, and then coming across and then do the same thing the other way without my lower body moving. So I'm coming across like that. There's a real temptation with these drills just to sort of move the arms, but hopefully what you'll be able to see from the camera above is that I'm not really creating much rotation from the shoulder at all. So I'm not going to create an effective stretch through the torso to enable me to get a really good stretch shortening cycle and a recoil of elastic energy from across the torso. This thoracic rotation is going to be really important as we start to scale up this movement into much more dynamic efforts. And obviously the lower body is going to be a lot more active, but we still need that thoracic rotation in order to maximise the efficiency of rotational power. Lots of people talk about this hip-shoulder separation within rotational sports, or this X factor, which really just means the amount of rotation I can create with my shoulders and how that compares to the line of my hips. So this is a really good drill for actually really trying to maximise that thoracic rotation, but also try and develop the rotational strength around the oblique system and the stability in the hips to actually allow that hip shoulder separation. The next thing we're going to have a look at is this half kneeling position. So I've got the leg nearest to the anchor point up, and there's a good reason for that. So you often see these done in various sort of either low kneeling, high kneeling, standing, this leg up. The reason I like to do it like this is I've got a nice linear progression towards my more dynamic chops and lifts. So here's my half kneeling chop, here's my lunging chop with some of the same characteristics. I might start to take on a more dynamic position, but I'm still covering the same sort of principles. Back legs loaded, front legs slightly in a split stance. So there's that one, or I can even start to bring that towards some of my more dynamic progression. So if we start with this, then the principles are already in place to be able to quickly progress towards more dynamic efforts. Okay, so the most attractive thing for me in these drills and these progressions that we've developed through to more explosive efforts is how they tend to capitalise on the muscular coordination that we see during explosive rotational power. So Thomas Myers in his book Anatomy Trends wrote a lot about this and these fascial lines that cross the body that create different movements that we see. And two of the fascial trains that we see within these drills, or that we're trying to capitalise on within rotational movement, are the spiral line. So they're probably best shown in standing rather than in this position. So the spiral line will come from serratus anterior, from the rhomboids, serratus anterior down through the external obliques, across the abdominals or rectus abdominals, internal obliques, glute max down through that leg. So we've got that connection from shoulder to hip that way. The second one would be the functional line that he describes, which is what effectively links the upper arm to the opposite side knee. So that will go from where pec major inserts into the humeral head, down through the lower fibres of pec major, down through the rectus abdominis again, and down to adductor longus, attaching halfway down through the femur. And again, we're just creating these spiral connections. So a feature that you find when you do these drills, especially when they get a bit heavier in standing, is you'll feel it through your hips and you'll feel it through your groin, through glute max, across your torso, right up into your pec. So I really feel with these that we're recruiting along those fascial lines that he describes, and hopefully having an effect on the muscular coordination that's critical for explosive rotational power. I think a lot of the time we tend to develop those muscles in isolation. The thing that we're really trying to capitalise on within this spiral lines progression is the coordination and the balance of those muscles working in tandem, and that there's no weak link within the chain. Okay, so the first part of this drill I'm going to look at is the amount of thoracic rotation that we can generate. So we want to essentially think of this as how far can I rotate the sternum away from the pelvis, which is remaining stable throughout, rather than just the shoulders. That's going to give us a good idea of how much we've rotated through the thoracic spine. So the cues I tend to use with this are look through the ring at either end of the movement. So sternum straight through the middle of the ring, both arms straight at either end. And I'm going to pull in, push away. Pull in, push away, both arms straight at either end, so that we're creating as much rotation as we can, not just bringing the arms across the body. What you see a lot of people do with these is they'll basically just either use the arms, and what you should be able to see from above is that I'm getting absolutely no thoracic rotation with that, or as they're over in that position, they'll end up with the ring almost in line with the pelvis, whereas we want it rotated like that, so they'll almost come in and then across like that with one arm bent. Again, it just reduces the amount of thoracic rotation that they're getting. What this also serves up really nicely with especially older, more experienced athletes is how little thoracic rotation they have. If they literally just cannot create much separation between their pelvis and sternum, and then that serves as quite a good little jump off point for things like your foam rolling, your thoracic rotation, your thoracic extension work. So oftentimes I find myself doing these drills and then going intermobility work back into this, intermobility back into this, because what we often see is so many athletes just lack thoracic rotation, which is so important for that effective transfer of energy across the torso. So something we really need to nail down at this early stage of development with the half kneeling chops and strikes is the role of this stance leg during the setup phase. So what we're looking for is that glute max fully engaged, and it's creating a powerful co-contraction with the abdominals to draw the pelvis into a posterior tilt, which is just going to enable glute max to really fully extend the hip and actualize that power development from the lower body. What you'll see a lot of time when people set up like this is they'll just almost take the tension off the hips, so there's glute max isn't doing much, the abdominals are fairly relaxed, the lumbar spine's just extended, and this back foot will just lay flat. That's going to have both performance and injury prevention implications further down the line. So it's something that we want to just reinforce over and over again with this movement, and then hope that it beds in as we build speed and complexity into this drill. So the cue you want to go for is dig the back foot in, use the glute to extend the hip and the abs to draw the rib cage down. So now we've got a pelvis that's reasonably neutral, plenty of ab tension, and we're reinforcing this co-contraction between glutes and abs. That'll create a big stretch through the anterior hip a lot of the time, but that's absolutely fine because that's often the real tightness in athletes that will just pull them into an extended position. So from a performance point of view, if we think about what this stance leg does during more powerful activities, that serves as the front leg during these striking patterns. Now the role of the front leg during, let's say a chopping pattern, let's say just like a hit like that, is that the front leg extends and it drags the rest of the pelvis and the shoulders round. So we want access to that full hip extension in order to maximize the role of that front leg. From an injury prevention point of view, if this lumbar spine is overextended, which we see a lot of the time, then as that hip extends and it pulls the pelvis round, our lumbar spine is going to get loaded in a very extended position, which puts the vertebra under a lot of shearing forces, which creates a lot of back pain issues that we see in rotational athletes. So at this early stage, get the athlete to set up. They might need a little pad underneath their knee. So dig the back foot in, squeeze the glutes, draw the rib cage down, and then go into those rotational patterns and really hammer opening up that front hip and developing that co-contraction between the glutes and the abs. And that's going to be a skill that we can scale up and up. So as we start to add more complexity with these more standing variations, we're going to hope that co-contraction continues, or at least we have the ability to communicate that to the athlete quite easily. So this has been a pretty thorough explanation of the half kneeling banded chops and the half kneeling banded strikes. As I said before, this serves as an entry point for pretty much every rotational athlete that I work with, be it a seasoned cricketer or a 12-year-old tennis player. Some of the principles that are covered in this, such as thoracic rotation, access to full hip extension, rotary stability, rotational strength, to be able to generate these chopping and lifting patterns, is fundamental to an athlete of any age and any experience. Obviously the coaching style within these early stages can be quite explicit. The movements are so slow and under heavy load that it gives us an opportunity to maneuver athletes into the positions that we want them in. We can explore full thoracic rotation, because as we add more speed and more complexity through the spiral lines progressions, then it's going to be impossible to teach those things with any effectiveness. So now's the time to do it. Just nail down those fundamentals, and this is an exercise that we just keep returning to again and again. I hope you found this video really interesting. If you want more information on this hierarchy, if you want to read more about what I've been trying to do with this and how this sort of process is developed, then head over to spirallines.com, where there's a lot more information. Thanks for watching.